Today, Britain's Prime Minister is fighting for survival.
That's after municipal elections saw voters reject Starmer's Labour Party, which lost well over 1,000 seats on local councils around the country, largely to Reform UK.
Will disastrous local election results end Keir Starmer's leadership of Labour? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Hey everyone, before we go on with today's conversation, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you want us to do next. And if you're listening on a podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from, and feel free to give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It helps other people discover the show.
My name is Kieran Andrieu. I'm a doctor of political economy, and I'm also a political commentator, which at the moment keeps me quite busy.
Well, Kieran, welcome back to The Take. The last time I got a chance to talk to you was in February, when you said UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer had already arrived in his lame duck season. And now it's May, just a couple of weeks after local elections. Tell us, how bad was it?
I think it was just about as bad as it could have been, which is to say, as many people expected, and I expected, and you didn't need to be a sage to be able to predict roughly where it was going to go. Well, Labour lost 1,498 councillors, so too shy of 1,500 individual councillors, from an election where 136 councils were up for election. So I think pretty catastrophic. The most remarkable thing about that is not necessarily the number of councillors that were lost, but it's the scale of that loss in relation to the scale of the win in 2024 at the general election.
A Labour landslide after 14 years in opposition, a spectacular turnaround in fortunes.
So for Keir Starmer not to only be, a one-term prime minister after such an enormous landslide victory, but to actually within 2 years be so neutered, to be so without his wings and so without power, is really extraordinarily unprecedented. And I think that's how Keir Starmer's prime ministership will be remembered. I don't think it will be remembered for endlessly bad policy. I don't think it will be remembered for endlessly good policy. I think it will be remembered as something that is very, very hard to put your finger on. It will be difficult for historians of the future to understand what Starmerism was and what kind of public mood it was attempting to capture.
It's such a dramatic shift to what you are describing, and yet I think someone might imagine that means something dramatic and immediate has happened, and yet it doesn't look like it's unfolding like that. It's a lot more slow. We've seen cabinet resignations.
Starmer is battling for his political survival at the end of a week that saw resignations by several junior ministers and his health secretary.
We've seen leaks, anonymous briefings, MPs circling in the wings. Yeah. What have these past 10 days or so been like for the party and for Keir Starmer?
First of all, that is how British politics tends to work. When there is this kind of regicidal atmosphere percolating, it happens slowly, it happens with gossip, with innuendo, and then the media starts to get excited. The British media, there's almost nothing they love more than a coup, and they start to spread that gossip further and wider.
We're standing in Downing Street. We've just seen the cabinet leave, including a rather long-faced Wes Streeting. The coup is over for now, or is it? Robert, what do you think?
I don't think the coup's over.
But I think the past 10 days have actually been counterintuitive in a way, and I'll tell you why. I think the British public, after 14 years of Conservative government, from 2010 to 2024 in this country, I think 5 prime ministers. I think I'm right. David Cameron, Theresa May, Liz Truss very briefly, Rishi Sunak, and of course Boris Johnson. And just this endless cycle of coup and regicide and disloyalty, while people's living standards and quality of life actually markedly declined. And the country, as part of a global economy, was buffeted from the financial crisis to COVID, with Brexit right in the middle of all of that. I think people got extremely fed up, really, really fed up with just this endless merry-go-round of egos and leadership ambition.
Right.
That is still very much in the ether. It's still effervescent in the kind of British political zeitgeist. And I do think that means that, to bring that to the past 10 days and articulate its relevance in relation to that, I think that people actually they don't like Keir Starmer, that's for sure, but they also don't really like people like Wesley Streeting or Angela Rayner or even Andy Burnham. They don't really like any of those people kind of jockeying for power. And I think it's because it gives them an acid flashback, if you like, to the 14 years of Conservative government in which everything just seemed like a kind of political party psychodrama. So even though Keir Starmer is deeply unpopular, I actually think he's bounced back from the past 10 days in a strangely kind of comfortable position, because even though his days are numbered, I want to emphasize this, it's a question of when, not if. At the same time, I think what the past 10 days have done is chastened any of his competitive kind of, this guy's so unpopular and these results are so catastrophic. The kind of the pathway to Downing Street is paved for us. Actually, I think what's happened in the past 10 days is that they've had a bit of a rude awakening.
Okay, so you mentioned people circling in the wings. Let's talk about some of those people. So you said Wes Streeting, who's the former Health Secretary. We have Angela Rayner, who's the former UK Deputy Prime Minister. And then this name that keeps rising to the top in headlines of the last few hours and days, Andy Burnham, who's a mayor. What should we know briefly about these people and whether or not they actually will be the ones we're calling Prime Minister soon?
Yeah. I don't want to be too simplistic about things. I also don't want to get too lost in the minutiae. I think that the key thing is that in different ways, all three of them are highly ambitious politicians and political operators. I think Wesley Streeting, you could probably say, is naturally, of the three of them, the most to the right or within the right of the Labour Party, naturally or instinctively. He's somebody who came up through student politics in the UK. Angela Rayner probably sits in the middle between Wesley Streeting and Andy Burnham. And Andy Burnham, you could probably say, is most naturally or instinctively left wing out of the three of them, but with a very, very heavy caveat to that. I think Andy Burnham is being spoken of as though he were the second coming. And I think that speaks to the dearth of options that there is within the Labour Party and within the Labour, certainly within the Labour left, as it were. And I also think that it's really important for people to understand that Andy Burnham, in my reckoning at least, is definitely a very ambitious political operator. His career has been nothing if not chameleonic. So he started with Tony Blair. He moved to Gordon Brown. Then he, some years later, ran against Jeremy Corbyn in the 2015 election, lost that, and reinvented himself as a kind of local hero, a local champion in Manchester, where he became Metropolitan Mayor, and pivoted quite dramatically to the left. Now, I don't necessarily think that makes him evil. But of course, he's got, it'd be naive to think that he isn't ambitious and driven by the tailwinds, the political tailwinds, as it were. I do think it's very, very dangerous for the left in this country, in the UK, to be thinking of Andy Burnham as a rupture with Starmerism and with Starmer, and as a clean break that will take the country in a dramatically different direction, that in so doing will head off the threats from reform. I do not see Andy Burnham as that figure. Nothing in his career path, not just the positions he's held, but also the things he's said, give me confidence that that is what the British electorate or the British left can expect. I think it's also important to say that Andy Burnham, his record on Israel is really quite disquieting. Is somebody who's either part of or very close to Labour Friends of Israel years ago, admittedly, within the Labour Party, when he had more of a prominent role outside of Manchester, but still, he was consistent in his support for Labour Friends of Israel. Andy Burnham's got on record in the past praising the Balfour Declaration and various other things. I could go on.
Wow.
I don't want to get lost in the source. But I think the picture I'm trying to paint is one of probable continuity with some tinkering vis-a-vis the Starmer project, and not one of dramatic shift, either in foreign policy with Palestine and more widely, or with domestic policy. And indeed, I think Andy Burnham said that he will stay within the current fiscal rules, which means the government won't borrow more money than it currently allows itself to borrow.
Yeah.
And that in turn has, as the media is reporting, has quelled the bond markets, has calmed the bond markets. So I think what we can expect is, if we get Andy Burnham as leader, somebody who is willing to go with what he sees to be the political tailwinds.
Well, Kieran, as you say, at the risk of getting lost in the sauce, I think what you just shared with us is the concrete things that people are actually voting on, which is so important to understand where people's mindsets are. And yet, one thing to understand for people outside of the UK is that British voters do not directly elect the Prime Minister. Labour could technically replace Keir Starmer tomorrow and install someone else without a general election. So as of now, what we know is that Starmer is still Prime Minister. He has rejected calls to resign, and he has said he is not going to walk away.
And I remind myself every day that I was elected into office to serve the people, to serve the country. That's what I believe in, and that's what I'll be getting on with.
So you've said the writing is on the wall. It is going to be when, not if.
Right.
What happens next then?
My expectation, and this could be completely wrong, tomorrow we could wake up and Starmer's going. But my expectation is that it will be an orderly transition from Starmer to Burnham, or probably to Burnham, almost certainly to Burnham. I don't know how that plays out, but my expectation is that all parties will agree that there is an interest in ensuring that it is orderly, partly because of the 14 years of Tory leadership, how that is so seared, burnt into public consciousness in this country. Now, maybe I'm being naive. Maybe I think that there's going to be more comity than there is. But I really believe that actually what that means is, in practice, there will be a roadmap that Keir Starmer agrees the transition of power for his departure behind the scenes with the people who are jockeying for power right now. Again, we could speculate endlessly on the details. I think what we can say for certain is that Keir Starmer will not lead the Labour Party into the next election.
No.
And all parties will, based on the evidence available to them, work out what that means for the Labour Party going into the next election, what the most propitious or auspicious time frame is for Keir Starmer to leave, when is the right time to fire the starting pistol on what will essentially be the Labour leadership that will face, barring some act of God, that will face Nigel Farage at the 2029 election. And of course, Farage is very much on a high at the moment. Maybe I'm projecting too much kind of rational behaviour onto all of them. The reason I think Keir Starmer will want to do this as well is because he's already in tatters and very difficult to discern. And so I think what he'll want to try and do is go relatively quietly, amicably, and hope, in his mind, hopefully salvage something, not plunge the Labour Party into the kind of, as the public sees it, chaos of 2010 to 2024, and in so doing, cast himself as a kind of Boris Johnson or Liz Truss.
Okay, so you mentioned the potential next Labour leaders who are waiting in the wings, jockeying for position. And perhaps just outside those wings is Nigel Farage and Reform UK.
We've been so used to thinking about politics in terms of left and right. And yet what Reform are able to do is to win in areas that have always been conservative, but equally, we're proving in a big way, we can win in areas that Labour have dominated, frankly, since the end of World War I.
Remind our audience who Reform is, who Nigel is, what they should know about what they did in these elections.
Reform UK gained the largest number of councillors the election.
The anti-immigration populist Reform Party, which has gained hundreds of council seats. Its leader, Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage, said the results so far represented a historic change in British politics. Labour lost support in traditional strongholds, such as the former industrial regions of central and northern England, along with some parts of London.
A huge number. It was an enormous success for them. And I think what that speaks to is how many parts of this country, how many parts of the United Kingdom have been totally and utterly let down and left behind by the two-party system. And by extension, how close together the two main parties grew. So people would vote, and it would just change the colour. It would just be Pepsi to Coke. Nothing really changed of substance. And I think there was only so many times that cycle could play out before charismatic leaders, and charisma is an important element of this. It's not all structural. Charismatic leaders, as Nigel Farage undoubtedly is, though I dislike him profoundly. Zach Bladsky on the left for the Green Party, charismatic leader. It was only a matter of time before those needs within society and therefore within the electorate were met by parties outside of the original old school traditional two-party order. And so just to finally round that off, I think what's important to know is that Reform is a kind of a stitching together of the conservative right in British politics, the kind of traditionalists, socially conservative, working class that has been either put out of work or put out of meaningful work en masse, and has, in my view, very unfortunately, been convinced that the primary lever of that, the primary cause of it, is mass immigration.
What does all of this leave people who saw what you called the chaos of the years of chaos under the conservative leadership, and then saw the fanfare and the great relief that came with Labour coming into power, promising stability, and now are in this moment where the government is looking fragile again, and they're reminiscing about a time when that didn't happen? What does that say about the political moment that the UK is in, and where does that leave people like you?
Yeah, so I think it's important to say that if you really dug beneath the surface with Keir Starmer and with the Labour Party, it was pretty obvious that this was going to happen, actually. Keir Starmer, the main problem is that he never really wanted to stand for anything, and he never really wanted to project a kind of visionary politics onto the UK. The UK, like many aging Western democracies, we might say, liberal Western democracies, has a lot of very serious structural questions to ask itself. Economic questions, social questions. And nobody coming into government and not being serious about even asking those questions, and I mean, a full kind of anatomy and diagnosis, is going to really last very long, in my opinion. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they are. Now, if you're Keir Starmer, you combine that lack of seriousness about dealing with the underlying structural problems, the lack of visionary politics that is necessary to that, with then the kind of less important personal qualities. Keir Starmer is an information guy. He's a details person. He was a lawyer. No doubt he was a good lawyer. But that doesn't translate necessarily to being a good politician. And I think what people have seen is that Keir Starmer is a far worse politician than they thought. So I don't want to get too sidetracked by the personal qualities, the lack of charisma, the lack of kind of thinking on his feet, the risk averseness, which was projected, it was writ large onto the entire political project. And I think what he thought and what his handlers, his strategists thought, was if you can come in after all this Tory chaos and just be sensible adult in the room and do a few things here and a few things there. Some of them were middle-sized things, like renationalising areas of the national railway system, various other things that the Labour government did do, more money for the NHS. It wasn't enough, but it was earmarked. The problem is that it's half measures. If you're dealing with massive structural dislocations and problems, you're either going to have to go in and be really bold and visionary about it and then fail, potentially, or you're going to have to go in and be a complete demagogue, a complete charlatan, as Nigel Farage is, and say, if we can't solve this, it's because of X, Y, and Z. It's because of those people, that cohort, that phenomenon, those problems. If you try and do some middle ground between those two, which is what Keir Starmer did, a bit right-wing, aping the rhetoric and dog whistle politics of reform in some areas, and then also trying to approach a couple of the structural things, but only in the foothills, only with a bit of tinkering, nobody is going to know what you stand for. Nobody is going to know what you stand for. It's like an AI system that collates everything on the internet and then spews it out in a kind of unfiltered way. Nobody can make sense of it. And I think that kind of that's Keir Starmer's political tragedy.
Kieran, I love that you left us off on such a visual note. The AI system spitting out is what UK voters are left with. Thank you for this conversation and your analysis of it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.